Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for coming out in the rain. Those of you who are out in the ether, stay safe, stay warm. I really appreciate everyone coming out tonight for our reader, Hillary Jordan. First, I want to remind you, cell phones, put them on silent. I'm a big fan of hearing your ringtone, but a little distracting.
Is my phone somewhere? I don't want it to go off. It's like, I don't want to be that person.
Is it over there?
Maybe. It's probably it. Okay. See, if you find it, just flip the... Yeah.
I do want to let you know we've got some other amazing things happening in creative writing. We are part of Texas Book Festival coming up on November 11th and 12th. If you haven't been, it's an amazing event, so please do come out. It's free, most events. You get to meet some of your favorite writers. Our bookseller tonight, Bookwoman, who's in the back there, they're going to be there selling books. It's a great place to make connections and to just totally be a fan of the written word. On November 8th, we're going to have the current Texas Poet Laureate here reading at ACC. So if you haven't been following our Poet Laureates, come and see Irene Silva read. She does some amazing work, and listening to her really puts you in the right place. Right? So I could start off with a fancy bio for Hillary, but I want to say this about her. There are three things you notice right off the bat about Hillary. One is the diminutive stature. I can't help it. I'm a little bit, average, taller. You also notice the red hair. But the third thing is that she is smart. And I mean whippishly smart. Don't test her, right? You find yourself laughing at things that she has said, and then you debate if you knew what she was talking about, right? She knows, but you're not always quite sure if you know the thing, right? I've known Hillary it's been a few decades now. Mm-hmm. And early on, we spent time over wine and other kinds of booze, talking about life, talking about the people we encountered. And those discussions have found a way into my writing, into her writing, and I'm grateful for that time that we've had. So I hope that tonight you get to experience some of that, and what you carry away then allows you to develop better stories, better characters, and better interactions with the people in your life. I'll do the fancy thing. I have to, okay. Right? Because the people out in Etherland, right?
Half the people are my friends, so
I understand, but this is going to be a video that goes out on the YouTubes and such. So, Hillary Jordan is an internationally best-selling author, screenwriter, and public speaker. Her two novels, MudBound and When She Woke, have been translated into 15 languages. MudBound won multiple awards, including the Penn Bellwether Prize for Socially Conscious Fiction, and it was adapted into an acclaimed Netflix film that I think most people saw during COVID, right? It was always in the top 10 on mine when it came through. So,
and one of the producers is sitting right here.
Producer, there. Excellent, right? So if you haven't seen it, you should. Right. She is also the co-editor and co-creator of an amazing collection of literary erotica called Anonymous Sex. We have copies back there. And if you're not here tonight and you want copies of it, Bookwoman will be selling them in store. Your writings appeared just about everywhere. New York Times, McSweeney's, Outside Magazine, Elle. Just so you know where she comes from, a BA from Wellesley College and an MFA in creative writing from Columbia, and currently, although a native Texas girl, living in New York. Please help me welcome Hillary.
One of the things that Prudence did not mention is that I think she's responsible for, in some respects, for my writing career. I was sort of at a crossroads. I had just gotten divorced. I was freelancing. And, we were hanging out a lot. And Prudence was the one who started talking about MFA programs. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I was very much kind of at a loss. I liked Austin, but, I'm more of an East Coast person. I love visiting, but I just wasn't sure. And she started talking about MFA programs. She's like, you should look into that. And I did. And it's like, I honestly don't know if I would have written MudBound or When She Woke without this woman right here. So I'm really grateful to her for that. And it did take me away from Austin, and I haven't seen her in a really long time. So very happy to be here. I thought I would do a quick reading, and very quick reading. And then Prudence has some questions to ask me, and then at the end, if any of you have questions, happy to answer them, and happy to sign books after the event. So I'm just going to read from the beginning of the book, because the rest of it doesn't make any sense unless you start with the beginning. Oh, wait. First, I'm going to read the epigraph. So this book is a riff on the Scarlet Letter, and the epigraph is from the Scarlet Letter. Truly, friend, and methinks it must gladden your heart after your troubles and sojourn in the wilderness, said the townsman, to find yourself at length in a land where iniquity is searched out and punished in the sight of rulers and people. So part one is called The Scaffold. When she woke, she was red, not flushed, not sunburned, but the solid declarative red of a stop sign. She saw her hands first. She held them in front of her eyes, squinting up at them. For a few seconds, shadowed by her eyelashes and backlit by the hard white light emanating from the ceiling, they appeared black. Then her eyes adjusted, and the illusion faded. She examined the backs, the palms. They floated above her as starkly alien as starfish. She'd known what to expect. She'd seen reds many times before, of course, on the street and on the vid, but still she wasn't prepared for the sight of her own changed flesh. For the 26 years she'd been alive, her hands had been a honey-toned pink, deepening to golden brown in the summertime. Now they were the color of newly shed blood. She felt panic rising, felt her throat constrict and her limbs begin to quiver. She shut her eyes and forced herself to lie still, slowing her breathing, focusing on the steady rise and fall of her belly. A short, sleeveless shift was all that covered her, but she wasn't cold. The temperature in the room was precisely calibrated to keep her comfortable. Punishment was meted out in other ways, in increments of solitude, monotony, and harshest of all, self-reflection, both figurative and literal. She hadn't yet seen the mirrors, but she could feel them, shimmering at the edges of her awareness, waiting to show her what she had become. She could sense the cameras behind the mirrors, too, recording her every eye blink and muscle twitch. And the watchers behind the cameras, the guards, doctors, and technicians employed by the state, and the millions watching at home, feet propped up on the coffee table, a beer or a soda in one hand, eyes fixed on the vid screen. She told herself she would give them nothing, no proofs or exceptions for their case studies, no reactions to arouse their scorn or pity. She would sit up, open her eyes, see what was there to be seen, and then wait calmly for them to release her. 30 days was not such a long time. She took a deep breath and sat up. Mirrors lined all four walls. They reflected back a white floor and ceiling, white sleeping platform and pallet, transparent shower unit, white sink and toilet, and in the middle of all that pristine white, a lurid red blotch that was herself, Hannah Payne. She saw a red face, hers, red arms and legs, hers. Even the shift she wore was red, though of a less intense shade than her skin. She wanted to curl into a ball and hide, wanted to scream and beat her fist against the glass until it shattered, but before she could act on any of these impulses, her stomach cramped and she felt a swell of nausea. She rushed to the toilet and threw up until there was nothing left but bile, and leaned weakly on the seat with her arm cushioning her sweaty face. After a few seconds, the toilet flushed itself. Time passed. A tone sounded 3 times, and a panel on the opposite wall opened, revealing a recess containing a tray of food. Hannah didn't move from her position on the floor. She was too ill to eat. Does anybody have water? I'm like losing it a bit here. Okay. Excuse me. There was a brief delay, and then the room went dark. It was the most welcome darkness she had ever known. She crawled to the platform and lay down on the pallet. Eventually, she slept. She dreamed she was at Mustang Island with Becca and their parents. Becca was 9, Hannah 7. They were building a sandcastle. Becca shaped the castle while Hannah dug the moat. Her fingers furrowed the sand, moving round and round the rising structure in the center. The deeper she dug, the wetter and denser the sand, and the harder it was for her fingers to penetrate it. "That's deep enough," Becca said, but Hannah ignored her sister and kept digging. There was something down there, something she urgently needed to find. Her motions grew frantic. The sand was very wet now and very dark, and her fingers were raw. The moat started to fill with water from below, welling up over her hands to her wrists. She smelled something fetid and realized it wasn't water, but blood, dark and viscous with age. She tried to jerk her hands out of the moat, but they were caught on something. No, something was holding them, pulling them down. Her arms disappeared up to the elbows. She screamed for her parents, but the beach was empty except for herself and Becca. Her face hit the sandcastle, collapsing it. "Help me," she begged her sister, but Becca didn't move. She watched impassively as Hannah was pulled under. "Kiss the baby for me," Becca said. "Tell it..." Hannah couldn't hear the rest. Her ears were full of blood. She started awake, heart tripping. The room was still dark, and her body was cold and wet. Just sweat, she told herself, not blood. Sweat. As it dried, she began to shiver, and she felt the air around her grow warmer to compensate. She was about to nod off again when the tone sounded twice. The lights came on, blindingly bright. Her second day as a Red had begun. Okay.
Thank you for that. I know my first question should be about your work, but I don't want it to be. What's your favorite mythological creature? I'm that kind of nerd.
Okay. You know, I've always really liked Medusa. You know, this vengeful goddess with her writhing snake hair. And the other one that really fascinates me is the mermaid legend, because it sort of came out of seals, from what I understand. Mermaid people would see seals and they would see human forms, and that idea. And of course, the mermaids in my favorite are sort of dark, and they seduce sailors to die and wrap them around with their long hair and their seaweed. So I like the creepy ones, I guess.
Well, it's only creepy if that's the way you're looking at them. Like I think about harpies as like the Greek essence of the mermaid and the harpy combined, because that's kind of what they are, right? Mm. So we're thinking of fish people and seals, but they're actually like the harpies themselves, like the bird women who then become those kinds of mermaids. And I like how we made it nicer, right? They're aerial, with talking fish instead of birds with diseased nails. Yeah. See, I'm right there with you. Creepy.
Yeah,
creepy. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your path as a writer, right? So part of ACC's ethos is start here, get there. Could you share with us, like you talked about me being a part of this thing, but like in terms of writing, like when you decided to do it, did you jump right in? Was there hesitance?
I've been writing all my life. I've started writing when I was a little kid. You know, I wrote plenty of bad poetry in high school. I wrote plays, and then I embarked on a career as an advertising copywriter. So I was writing ad copy and commercials. And at that time, you know, I had gotten divorced, and I was at a real crossroads in my life, and you know, just looking at what I was doing, you know, writing immortal words, you know, like its patented formula penetrates hair to build volume from the inside out, you know, and I didn't want that to be my life, and I think I just sort of had always had it in my mind that I would love to write the great American novel. And so I started really writing fiction to do the applications to grad school. I wrote a couple of short stories, and I got rejected everywhere except Columbia, but they said yes, and so I packed up and moved to New York. And part of the reason that I pursued a graduate degree instead of just sitting down and writing was that after years of doing the commercial side of it, I really wanted to be immersed in literature. I wanted to be surrounded by people who were pursuing what I was. I wanted readers from my work. I wanted mentors. And I wanted deadlines. Because as every writer knows, you can find endless ways to put off writing. Your floors get really clean, you know what I mean? You learn how to bake bread, I mean, all of it. So I wanted that immersion, and actually, it was actually in the second semester of Columbia that I started both of my published books. MudBound was based on a teacher's assignment. They said, you know, write a few paragraphs from one of your relatives' point of view. And I had grown up hearing these stories about my grandparents' farm, and so I wrote a few paragraphs of that, and the teacher said, you know, this is really good, you might want to keep going with that. And then I also had the beginning of something about a woman who wakes up alone in a prison cell, and she's killed someone. I didn't know what that was about. I didn't know where to go with that. So I wrote MudBound instead, and it did pretty well. And it was during the pre-publication for that, which took 1.5 years. It takes forever, almost as long as it takes to get a movie made, to get a book published. And I went back to the idea about the red woman in the room. And at this point, it was post 9/11, so we had a whole lot of incursions into people's liberty in the name of, patriotism and security. We had, the Bush administration, a lot of attacks on individual rights, civil rights, women's rights, and I was pissed about all of that. And so I started thinking about this book and the red woman who's being stigmatized, and then I'm like, maybe I should reread The Scarlet Letter. And so I went back and read that book, and which I had been forced to read like as a 9th grader, and of course was in no way mentally prepared for a book like that. It's an incredible book. And then I sort of began the novel. Riffing on that and on the strictures of Puritan life, which is what it's about, an illicit love affair. And so it doesn't directly translate When She Woke, doesn't. Hester Prynne pretty much just stays put and, wears her scarlet A. And, my heroine in When She Woke basically spends most of the book running for her life. But so that's sort of how those books came to be. And yeah.
You mentioned deadlines. Was that the most surprising thing? Like, once you decided to be a writer, was that the most difficult thing for you? Like, what aspect of writing were you not necessarily prepared for?
The solitude, I think, part of it. And look, I'm an only child. I like my own company. But there's an intensity of writing fiction, literary fiction, and a solitude to it. I mean, I had come from an environment in advertising where I always had a partner, a writer, art director. And so I wasn't used to that. And it was hard, I'm a perfectionist, so it was slow. And having those deadlines just really helped. It just forces you to put words down on paper. And I spent, a bit experimenting, just trying different things. And that's one of the gifts of grad school, is that you're encouraged to do that, So, that MFA was invaluable for me. Not necessarily would be necessary for other people, but it was absolutely invaluable for me. And I needed a shift out of this very commercial space I had been in. The irony of that is that, it's like, okay, I'm not going to be clever anymore. I'm not going to sell anything. I'm not even going to look at that. And then, of course, when MudBound came out, it was like, grabs readers from the very first second, which of course is what ads have to do, and, good dialogue, and that's what ads do. And so I ended up kind of realizing one day that all of that time I'd spent doing ads contributed to the success of my fiction. So there you go.
So it seems like your characters visit you, hang out with you for a while before you put them on the page. Like you said, you had the assignment that you were working on. These stories kind of taken from family, but then this red woman was kind of there in your brain space. Do you have like a catalog of these characters just hanging out in your head? Like, are there people in there who are waiting to get out?
No, there are stories that are waiting to get out. You just encounter things and you don't know exactly what to do with it at the time. As anybody familiar with the Harper's Index, Harper's Magazine, the last page, they have a list of all of these statistics. And one day I was reading it, and there was a factoid. Number of women killed last year from electrocution due to their underwire bra. And I'm like, that is just so crazy, right? And I wanted to write something about it, but I didn't know what to write. And it was probably 8-10 years later. Because, a story isn't an event. A story is something that happens to people. And I'm like, who could that happen to that would profoundly affect them? And the answer is a comedian. So I ended up writing a short story called Aftermath about a comedian whose very beloved wife is killed in this horribly funny way to other people, and kind of his journey after that. So things just kind of, When She Woke was a conversation I had 30 years ago with my uncle about the drug problem in America. And he said, I think all drugs ought to turn you bright blue so that other people can see you coming. And that stuck in my head for 20 years. And then it sort of evolved into When She Woke. So nothing's really wasted, it's like, and I do write it down. I write down ideas for stories, and it just takes me a while to know what to do with them. I'm not fast like some people. I'm really jealous of people who are fast, but I'm not.
Yeah, the prolific poets, I always want to tell, we're good. You don't need another book, and then they put out another one. I go, okay, thanks, that's great. Oh, you're working on another set of poems. Thanks, that's good. Yeah. Those people. So you have written fiction, nonfiction. You mentioned the bad poems that you were writing. You've done the screen work. Do you prefer one? Are there really big differences that challenge you in different ways in terms of shifting your brain to do the different things?
Yes, very, very different things. I sort of started I think I started with poetry. My mom told me I was writing poems when I was 6 years old. I wrote a poem, apparently. So we had a dachshund named Siegfried, and we had tomatoes in the backyard, and he would go around and take a bite out of all the low-hanging tomatoes. And I think that was my first poem, was about that. Lost to history, alas, the treasure that it would have been. And then, fiction, I kind of focused on fiction, but I also, wrote essays and so on, nonfiction. I've never written memoir. No interest in writing about myself. But I like writing essays, I like writing opinion pieces, I've done a book review or two, and that's all very different. What's the most different is screenwriting and fiction writing, because it's just, and you have to I had to really adapt my own book in order to understand it. Because to
understand your own book.
To understand the process.
Okay.
So MudBound was made into a movie, and the person who adapted it, Virgil Williams, became a friend, and he's actually doing a panel with Carl later this week at the film festival. And you can't take a big book and make a 2-hour movie without losing a lot of things. And as the writer, I'm like, we need to put that in, I need to put that in, and then I adapt my own second novel, And it's like, oh, wow, now I get it. You know, you can't do it. And also that film has very different demands. And the first version I wrote was pretty faithful to my book. And then the second major draft was just, shoo, and you know, I just kind of, there were no sacred cows, you know, I just looked at everything. But I was telling the class that sort of screenwriting is more like building a scaffolding for a house that other people are going to decorate and, you know, bring to life in certain respects. And, you know, the novel is the whole house, you know, with every little detail in it. Part of the joy of screenwriting is that it is very collaborative. So you have all of these other people whose job it is to add to that magic. The director primarily, but you know, the production designer, the cast, you know, and so you sort of say the minimum. You give them the minimum amount of narrative, which is the part I struggle with in fiction, is the narrative. In fiction, the narrative for me every word has to be music. In screenwriting, they want the minimum number of words needed to convey the scene, knowing that the actors, the director, the art director, all these other people are going to bring their creativity to it and flesh it out. So very, very different forms. I'm much faster as a screenwriter. I mean, I wrote a screenplay in 6 months, which for me was lightning fast. It was still 2 months late to the producers, but you know, books take me years, and so they're more agony for me, I would say, but also more satisfying in a way because they're mine, you know, and a movie belongs to a whole bunch of people, so it's very different. I really like doing both. I think that having both keeps me more balanced and happier. I think if I only did one or the other, I really like doing both. And I also just have a Jones to write a play. Maybe I'll do that at some point. Anyway, long answer to your question.
Nice. Can we talk about anonymous sex?
Sure.
So what brought about that idea? Like, because editing different for you.
I had never edited a book. The idea my friend Cheryl and I had probably 10 years ago. And the idea, it was something that had never been done. So we wanted to get literary writers, like really good writers that you would never expect to be writing erotica, and solicit stories from them, list the names alphabetically, but none of the stories would be attributed, hence the name Anonymous Sex. So it was a really interesting project. We wrote letters to all these people. I worked with some amazing writers, editing, and just, you know, we had 2 Pulitzer Prize winners, you know, the kind of writers that you're just in awe of. Louise Erdrich, I mean, come on. And it was fun, and I think that the anonymity part gave people the ability to do whatever they wanted, right? And everybody had to sign a contract not to reveal which story was theirs for a year and a half after publication. Some people will never reveal their stories. And it was our pandemic baby. We're always too busy to do it. Short story collections make no money, and they're a huge amount of work. And then the pandemic came, and we were both just kind of frozen. And it's like, why don't we do this fun thing and write a couple sexy stories and edit a whole bunch of others. So that's how that came about.
Nice. I want to ask you a little bit about failure. In my classes, we've been talking about failure, reading Questlove, reading different artists, and their kind of approach to, I created this thing, and I don't know what to do with it, but it doesn't seem to do the thing that I wanted it to do, and kind of the way we hold on to stuff, and we don't want to say goodbye to that thing. Like, how do you approach that when the thing doesn't quite work out the way you wanted it to?
Well, I mean, I have a failed novel. I mean, I spent 4.5 years writing a sequel to MudBound that's in a drawer. And I just never thought I would be that person, you know. The book was super long. It needed a lot of, you know, my agent, my editor both were like, you know, and it was devastating. And I put it away, and it's still in that drawer, and now I'm working on something else. And my screenwriting career started, you know, pretty soon after that. And so, I don't know, it's a hard thing to, it's hard to look at that and go, wow, that was 4.5 years of my life. I mean, at one point I did like 5 residencies, like 5 months out of 1 year, just, right? So, but as I said before, one thing I've learned is that nothing is ever wasted. You know, I can't tell you what I have learned from that, really, but I know that it isn't wasted. I mean, I know that the book didn't work, but there's some beautiful writing in that book that's different from other writing I've done. And, you know, it happens. And you know, risk is a huge part of the creative process. And it's when creative people don't feel free to fail, when children don't feel free to fail, which, by the way, I think a lot of them aren't given that, that you become unhappy, that you can't, and also that you can't reach, you know, as far. I mean, this book I was writing was set in Germany. You know, it was set after the war. You know, and I tried. And I may come back to it at some point, but right now I've kind of moved on to other stuff.
And you're okay knowing, like, it's in this place, you can go back to it if you need to. Those people are still there, the place is still there.
Yeah, I'm not okay with it, no. But, you know, I loved these characters, and I don't know what I'll do with it. I may never go back to it. I know my publisher would like me to, since it is the sequel to MudBound. But I don't know. I don't know what I'll do with it.
We've been talking about censorship. I don't know if any of you have been following what's going on here in Texas and around the nation. Have your books run into any censorship issues? I mean, because you've got violence, you've got sex, you've got language concern, like all of those things are in there. Have you run into any censorship concerns?
No, I mean, I would be so thrilled if my books got banned in Texas. I'd be like, yes, I'm doing something right. I've run into a more, I think, insidious form of censorship a bit, in this sort of way that the whole publishing business and other creative fields have evolved this idea that you can only write about your own experience, and the whole issues of appropriation, cultural appropriation. You know, the cancel culture thing, I think it has had a really chilling effect on publishing. You know, MudBound is told from 6 points of view, 3 of which are Black, first-person points of view. I don't think MudBound would be published today, just because of the environment around writing about race, and because of the sort of the pile-on thing that happens.
Like, who gets to tell the story?
Well, no, it's more like, it's like, there was this book, what was it, Dirt. And it was an Oprah pick, and it was, you know, Ann Patchett blurbed it, and one person wrote a nasty thing, you know, about how dare this woman, she's not even Mexican, you know, the book, you know, and then it was a tidal wave of scorn and people piling on, and I think Oprah withdrew her blessing for it, and like all this stuff happened to this writer, and I haven't read American Dirt. I don't know if it's a good book or not, but surely that doesn't deserve to happen to a person for trying. you know.
Because the argument is it's a work of fiction, right? Like we are crafting these characters, and these characters are moving through a world that's been created.
I think if you're writing about a culture that is not your own, you have to be sure to get it right. You have to do a lot of research. You have to be respectful. But if you tell writers you can't write about a culture that's not your own, we wouldn't have half of literature, you know. And we also exoticize those cultures by doing that. You know, Camilla Shamsi wrote a piece in Granta about that, about how you can't, if you say to a white Englishman, you can't write about Iranian women, then you're saying, you know, I can't possibly understand you. You're not, you know, you're so foreign, you're exotic, you know, write us out of your history. So there has started to be a lot of pushback against this. Penn recently came out, Penn American Center came out with a big piece about it. And I think other voices are speaking out, voices of color, writers of color, artists of color are speaking out against it as well. And look, this is not to say that I mean, cultural appropriation can be a very real thing. And, you know, it can be really awful. But I feel like as an artist, especially as somebody who's writing literature, it is incumbent on me to explore other ways of being alive on this planet, to get outside my own head, my own comfort zone, and think about what it's like for other people. And that's what we ask readers to do of literature. We say, okay, you know, Little Miss Tarrytown, Austin, Texas, you know, think about what it's like to be an immigrant, or think about what it's like to be, you know, a disabled person, or think about what it's like to be, you know, an elf, whatever it is, right? Sort of this idea of illuminating our common humanity is what literature does. And if we can't write about that, then, you know, it would be
where
pretty
people
sad.
going to get the stories?
It would be pretty sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'd have a lot of really sad stories if writers only wrote about themselves.
I was going to say, like, that's Hemingway.
Yeah.
What's next for you? Like, what are you working on now that you're excited about, that you want people to know about?
Well, I am working on a new novel that's set in Maine. That's a kind of that I intend as a microcosm of the fractures happening in the country, because I tend to write about what I'm worried most about. So I'm writing this book that's about democracy and about the environment and in a town in coastal Maine. And I'm sure I'll find a way to sneak abortion in there as well, because I'm very, very worried about that. But I've already written a whole book about that. When She Woke is about a world in which this woman is read because she had an abortion in Texas and it's illegal. So working on that. I just finished this script about the Texas prison rodeo that I'm hoping will get made. I'm working on a comedy because I need some comedy and laughter in my life. That's kind of a send-up of the whole wellness industry, and it's called Wooville. Hoping that When She Woke gets made into a film. Probably about to do a big rewrite on that, so we'll see. So it's a lot of stuff going on. It's good to be busy. The pandemic was like, I'm sure for all of you too, it was just like really hard, and I was really unproductive even though I had all this time.
Yeah, which of course was the grand irony of it, right? Yeah. Like we all kept saying, if I had enough time, then I could finish that novel. I could work on all those poems, and then we all just watched MudBound on Netflix. Yeah. I mean, like, you know. I have more questions, but I want to ask, does anyone here have a question? And I can run the mic up to you, or I can keep asking my
I bet
questions.
If you stood up and just said it, we could hear you pretty well.
Well, the live stream might not catch it, but yeah.
I keep forgetting about the live stream.
Yeah. No?
Yes, Ashley?
I probably don't need a microphone. I can project. Oh, that's right. Okay, so I have a question about what do you do as a writer when you feel uninspired about something you're working on, or you have the typical writer's block? Like, what are your processes for sort of like getting out of that and getting on to be able to meet deadlines and go on with your process?
Like in the immediate moment, I do something physical. I take a walk, take a swim, I get out of my head and into my body. At least I try to do that. I also eat a lot. I bake and then eat it all myself. So, you know, in sort of the larger picture, I find I don't know that I've had writer's block really per se. I came to a point where I didn't know what the next book was going to be, which has never happened to me before. And I wrote to an author friend of mine, and she said, "Write about what hurts your heart." And I started to think about that, and then this new idea, it's a seed at this point, kind of came about. I do a lot of my best work at artist colonies, these wonderful places. They're set in beautiful settings where you go and you're surrounded by other creative people and they provide your meals and you just work. So I tend to work best in like bursts of intensity, right? 5 weeks, 12 hours a day, followed by periods of, ferocious indolence, essentially. So Stephen King writes every single day, and God bless him, I wish I could do that. I think that when I do write, it's a very intense thing, so I need breaks from it. Thank you for asking the question.
So I write short stories, and I'm interested in long-form writing. So I was just wondering if you have any advice for people who feel like they have infinite ideas and a lot of complicated thinking about all these things, but they kind of manifest themselves in short-form stories. Do you have any advice for people who want to write long books?
I don't know you. Some people are, like my friend Jen has tried to write short stories and she just can't. She is a long form person. Then you look at somebody like John Cheever, or who's the lady in Canada? Just won the...
Atwood?
No, not Margaret Atwood, the other one. Anyway, who?
Monroe?
Yes, Alice Munro. She's a master of the short form. If you... I guess the advice I would give is wait until you have a big idea, because you're going to be living with this for years, and it has to be a large enough idea that you can write about it for 80,000 words, right? So make sure it's something that you're deeply interested in, that you have a lot of questions about, because writing, for me anyway, is, I'm never sure at the beginning. It's about asking questions and following that rather than providing answers to people, which I have no interest in doing. So I would say, wait till you have a big idea. You'll know, because a short story won't be enough. I tried to write MudBound as a short story, and it was like 50-page long short story, and it was like the Cliff Notes, right? It was just, and I showed it to a teacher. She's like, "This is a novel," So you'll know when you have it, because a short story will not be able to contain it. Alternate path is that you write connected short stories, which has kind of become a thing. And, that can be very successful as well. But to me, the great novels are big-ass stories, and the writer is deeply invested, and you have to be, because living with the same characters for, in my case, 6 years and 4 years and 4.5 years, it's a long time. So, but I think you'll know when you have it,
Okay, I have one more question for you.
Okay.
What character do you wish you'd written?
Do I wish I'd been?
That you wish you'd written?
I wish I'd written.
Yeah, like what world do you wish you'd created?
Oh boy. I love, well, I don't know. Okay, that's not the question you asked. Let me just go back. I mean, I love science fiction, and I used to really love the Middle-earth world. And I used to read those books whenever I was distressed, whenever something bad happened. But as I got older, I came to feel like that all the female characters are kind of flat and uninteresting and beautiful. So it's fallen out of favor a bit. But I loved the George R. R. Martin stuff. Well, I liked the first 2 books. And then the books kept getting progressively longer and worse because he doesn't have an editor. I'm a rather opinionated person, as you might have noticed. So worlds like that, I mean, I love world building. Creating When She Woke World was great for me. One of my favorite sort of speculative fiction books is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, who's one of my favorite authors. Won the Nobel, and that's an amazing world. And the way he does, and Clara and the Sun, the new one, the way because a short story is like a little snow globe, and his novels are kind of like that too. Like he kind of, well, not the 2 I'm speaking about, He takes a small world and builds it in such a way that it has all of these echoes, that it feels like part of this large universe that you just know is there. And so I don't know, I might have to write another speculative book at some point. I could never have created Jane Austen's worlds, but I love them. Yeah. I kind of wish I were Shakespeare. If I could be anybody, it would be him. Because I do think he's the greatest writer in English and one of the greatest humanists. His understanding of people and all their complexity. So, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if I really love something, it's like, dang, I wish I'd done that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's just, so.
Because I think so much of art, often we approach it like, oh, I could have done that thing, right? But the things that really grab us are the like,
Yeah.
Oh, if only I could have.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We're out of time, and I hate that we're out of time.
Thank you for having me. It was so great. Prudence just became the chairman of the creative writing department, and one of the first things she did was invite me to come and speak. And thank you all for coming out in this absolutely dreadful weather, and for the warm welcome here in Austin.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.